Hello and welcome back to another video. Today here again on Forza Horizon 5 to take a very first look at another brand new addition to this game, which is this 1960s Plymouth Belvedere. This is actually the second new to Horizon car this week. I did take a look at the Corvette Z06 a couple of days ago if you want to go and see a video on that. But this one requires 40 points in this week's festival playlist in summer season, which as you can see I've done by doing the trial, a couple of event labs, the PR stunts, the 2 seasonal championships here, photo challenge, collectibles, and the 2 rivals, which I always do at the start of a season because they count towards every week. But yeah, it is kind of interesting that they're adding new cars as 40-point prizes in this update, although it is slightly inconsistent, because this week we have 2 new to Horizon cars, and then next week we have 2 cars that return from Horizon 4. So it's a little bit unbalanced, but yeah, there are now some new cars for the 40-point prizes as well. The Belvedere appears to be another old American thing, which to be honest I kind of think we already have more than enough of in this game. It is in the end very similar to most other 60s muscle cars and things we already have in game, so I would have kind of liked to see more new American vehicles than classics in this update. Anyway, just like many of these other American classics, it has a humongous engine, a 7-litre V8 in fact, which produces 365 horsepower and 637 torques, but also adding to the car's weight of 1,687 kilos in total. Despite all of this meaning it handles pretty terribly by modern standards, it was actually surprisingly fun to drive completely stock, mostly because of how ridiculously it leans and the body roll if you corner quickly, or just not slowly. If you go more than 10 miles an hour around a corner, it will lean over. As you may expect then, it has a fairly low PI rating of 529 from standard, putting it towards the lower end of C class. In a minute then, we'll need to see what, if any, options are available to improve this thing. Quickly though, or rather not so quickly because this car is incredibly slow, before we do that, we thought it might be a fun idea to drag race the Belvedere against a couple of its contemporary muscle car competitors from back in the day. The 1969 Chevrolet Nova and the 1970 Dodge Challenger were picked for this. They're 2 slightly newer cars, but in theory similar performing rivals to the Belvedere. I did though for this have to go and change the colour from that horrendous dreary beige colour to this rather nice manufacturer blue. Oh my god, the gears.
Can stay awake forever.
That was close.
In terms of manufacturer colours then, you've already seen the beige it came in, and this rather nice blue, almost green colour that I painted it in for the drag race. But as well as this and the beige we started with, there's also a bright red option available, a darker blue, another blue, a black, a silvery grey, and a white. In terms of other customization and upgrades, there's not really much in the way of visual mods. There's the usual front bumper, which sort of removes the chrome and adds that sticky outy bit at the bottom. There's classic style Forza Aero, which is that funny little wing, which doesn't look as bad as the other style, but is still pretty horrendous. And being a classic muscle car, it has these 3 pretty standard kind of hood bonnet options if you want to make the front look more like that. But all of them seem to remove that rather nice sticky uppy badge that is very dangerous for pedestrians at the front there. There are a few engine swaps as well. There's a diesel V8 for some reason, but there's also many other V8s. And a V12 for reasons if you really want your muscle car to, well, sound like that. You can of course all-wheel drive swap it for some reason, twin turbo it, or supercharge it, but other than that, almost everything is as you would expect, except on this, you can increase the tyre profile size of the rear wheels, which mostly until this point has only been an option reserved for off-road vehicles, so it'd be interesting to see if they start adding tyre profile sizes to cars that they think we potentially might use for drag racing. But other than that, it's got all of your sort of compounds and track widths. Nothing particularly special in tyre compounds, although it does have the two different vintage styles, including the white walls there. But other than that, it's all as you would expect, with some drivetrain options, platform and handling options, and several engine upgrade options. After this, we did have a quick look to see if there were any decent looking B-Class tunes for road racing, but there weren't really many options as the car had only just become available, so instead I returned to try this a couple of days later. At this point, there still weren't many options, and a lot of people seem to have made dirt tunes for this car, so I ended up applying a Ghost of Russia tune with 471 horsepower, street suspension, and vintage tyres. With this applied, I managed to get into the first race of a B Clas Horizon Open session, which was going to consist of 2 sprints and a circuit. Starting with this, the Riviera Sprint, which only had myself and one other person in it. Sadly, the lobbies being this empty is quite a common occurrence on this game these days, ever since the release of Motorsport pretty much. Anyway, they were in a Mercedes SSK, which handled better than the big muscle car through the first section of this track, but into the higher speed part of the route, I did pull ahead, but then hit a couple of walls and lost the lead. But in the end, on a sprint, the Belvedere was always going to win, and I blasted past on the next straight, and eventually did win. The second sprint race was the Desansard Dorado sprint, which saw a couple more people joining, although 4 racers isn't exactly a good test of this car and tune and whether it's any good in online. Here I very quickly found myself in second place with that same Mercedes ahead for a while, but after the first main straight I was right up behind them again, and through the higher speed middle part of this route I just sailed past them basically, and then continued to extend the gap all the way to the finish line. 2 wins so far, admittedly not with many cars competing against me, and in sprint routes which very much seem to favour this car, but still, 2 wins in 2 races isn't too bad. The third and final race, though, was at a circuit, and not just any circuit, the Chihuahua circuit, which is probably one of the tightest circuits in this game, and therefore the one this Belvedere is potentially least suited to out of all of the options. It certainly seemed that way to begin with anyway, ending up in last place at the end of the first lap, but then an Audi decided they no longer wanted to be on the road, and I had a great last couple of laps chasing down that SSK. The Belvedere, though, surprisingly wasn't as bad around here as I initially thought it might be, and was actually faster than that Merc around here, but it is quite a narrow and twisty track, so despite being right behind them, I couldn't find a way past on those last couple of laps. Eventually finishing this final race in 3rd place then. Despite being the only race of the 3 that I didn't win, this was by far the most fun of them. The Plymouth was surprisingly not as bad in the corners as I thought it might be, and yeah, I had an enjoyable couple of laps chasing down that SSK. All in all though, not a bad Horizon Open. It is just a shame that not really enough people are playing these anymore, so in future we might have to think of a better way of comparing cars with tunes. Maybe I need to use a sprint and a circuit in Rivals or something so that I can compare times, so that we can see how new editions compare to each other, rather than potentially not very many people online. Let me know what you think of that idea, but potentially we'll do that going forward. And that is going to do it for a very first look at the Plymouth Belvedere here on Forza Horizon 5. From standard, it is pretty terrible, to be honest, but is quite entertaining how much body roll it has when you attempt to go around corners at more than about 10 miles an hour. In the drag race, it did reasonably well against its contemporaries, or slightly newer cars. Has some upgrade options, but not really anything interesting, and in B Class with upgrades seemed reasonably good, but as I say, in this game these days, it is quite hard to compare it, because so few people are actually racing. So potentially in future videos, I'm going to have to pick a sprint route and a circuit that I'm going to have to use to kind of compare any cars that have potential in A and B class maybe. Faster cars I tend not to do that with anyway. But there we go, that is going to do it for a very first look at this brand new addition to the game. So thank you very much for watching, do let me know what you think of it, and I'll be back with the next video very soon.